this year, 2020 has been an unusual year for all of us. Well, the heavens, if you will, are going to delight us with another unusual event on Halloween itself, which of course is this Saturday. And of course, it's falling on a Saturday, so everyone's excited about that. But it's going to be a blue moon. So what is a blue moon? It is the second full moon in one lunar cycle. And that only happens very rarely. In fact, the information I could find for a blue moon to fall on a Halloween happens 3 to 4 times in a century. So that is rather rare. And, Saturday is not a big deal. That happens about every 6 years or so. And as far as a full moon, it is a 19-year cycle. So the next time there'll be a full moon on Halloween will be in the year 2039, and then 2058, 2077, and 2096. So you decide which one you're going to be able to last for. If this is this may be our last, it may be many more to come. So anyway, I thought I'd throw in that little bit of fact. It's kind of interesting. So anyway, I'm going to start. Actually, I had some blue moon photos, which are really interesting. This is actually a photo that was taken by Chuck O'Rear, and it is a Napa Valley vineyard. This one was just a fun image. Now this is our first ghost stop. It is Chateau Montelena. I'm going to start at the north end of the valley and work my way down. Anyway, Chateau Montelena was constructed in the 1880s for Albert Tubbs, and hence the name Tubbs Lane. And there's some really interesting things that happen there. They didn't start having paranormal activity until the 1960s. And some link it to the fact that the family estate, the mansion that went with it, was destroyed in the Hanley fire, as it was called, in 1964. And it was similar to the Tubbs fire that we had 3 years ago, as far as its path is concerned. Anyway, after 1964, there started to be a lot of paranormal activity at the winery itself, Chateau Montelena. And Montelena is actually a contraction of Mount St. Helena, just as a little side note. Anyway, some of these activities included, Mr. Tubbs faintly being visible, and he is seen throughout the winery, and he seems, he doesn't interact with humans. Some apparitions do, some don't. I'm going to use the word apparition, by the way, and that is the more technical term for a ghost. So anyway, you can see him around at various places in the cellar, in what is now the apartment, which is upstairs. It's now a tasting room, but was living quarters for the owners for a while. And he can be seen around the grounds. And as I said, he's faint, or you feel a very cold presence around him and around the winery. And he seems to be looking for something and very upset. He's not a very happy ghost. It's not like he's out to scare people. As I said, it seems like he's looking for something. And most people that have seen him say it's probably he is upset with the fact that his mansion was burned down. It was quite an estate at one time. And there are also other paranormal activities at Chateau Montelena. There seems to be quite a bit of activity around what's called Jade Lake. It's the man-made lake with the pagodas. I don't know how many of you've been to Chateau Montelena, but if you have been, you know what I'm talking about. And the activity is mostly odd occurrences like flashes of light, or there are the birds, that sort of thing, that are nesting there. are disturbed and they fly off for no known reason. And then there's occasion where people are there and like if they're picnicking at one of the pagodas, uh, something will, there's an item, one item in particular is usually picked and it keeps dropping to the ground, even though it's picked up and secured or whatever, it's constantly being dropped to the ground like it's being knocked. So there is a little bit of a prankster there at Chateau Montelena. And by the way, this is Albert Tubbs. I thought you might like to see a picture of the gentleman. That is the sad ghost that roams around Chateau Montelena. Anyway, that's our first story. And I'm going to have a happy little, grumpy little picture here. This is just clip art because I can't, for some of these stories, I can't show you an image of the actual location at the request of the property owners. So I have fill-in images just to keep you a little occupied while I tell you the story. Not too far away from Chateau Montelena in the Calistoga area is a very nice home. It dates to the early 1900s, and it's the home of a confirmed bachelor who is in his 50s. He never wanted to get married. He never wanted a family, children, that sort of thing. In fact, he would kind of remove himself from situations where there were children because that's how uncomfortable he was with the little one. Well, sometimes fate intervenes, and what you don't want is what ends up in your life. About 10 years ago or so, a apparition of a young boy, probably about the age of somewhere between 7 and 10, decided to set up home in this gentleman's house. And you know that you're going to keep him around because you name things. And the bachelor chose to name this young little boy ghost Jack. And Jack does things like play practical jokes, simple things like, you know, how you touch someone on the shoulder and you're on the other side. Other things like he loves keys and objects. So he moves things around. And whenever the bachelor is in a hurry, that's when he can't find his keys. And he cries out, Jack, where did you put my keys? And Jack helps the keys materialize because he knows the bachelor is in a hurry and might be a little grumpy. But speaking of grumpy, one thing that is a problem with Jack, he does have a little bit of a temper. And when he's not happy, he literally turns everything upside down in the house. You have to remember he's a ghost, even though he looks like a little boy. And he's quite capable of turning very heavy things upside down. So when the bachelor comes home after maybe scolding Jack a little too much or ignoring Jack, because Jack just loves attention, then the bachelor comes home and he'll find the couch upside down. He'll find, the stereo kind of cabinet upside down, the entertainment center. He'll find stacks of books in odd kind of stacking that defies gravity. And he knows Jack is very unhappy, but Jack won't help right the things. It is up to the bachelor to turn the couch back up to, on its feet and put the books back in the bookcase and put all the food back in the refrigerator and freezer. It goes on and on and on as far as what Jack will do when he's having a temper tantrum. And as far as the way Jack looks, he is, like I said, about 7 to 10 years old. And he, you can't see his facial features. He is definitely a full apparition, full meaning you can see him from head to toe. He's dressed in just like trousers and a shirt. It's hard to identify the era that he might have been living because it's, kind of nondescript as far as the era of his clothing. And he seems to have light colored hair. As far as whether it's blonde or light brown, that is hard to determine. But anyway, once the bachelor has everything righted and he's talking very gently and quietly and reassuring to Jack, and he promises Jack he'll spend more time with him, and which makes Jack very happy. And then Jack starts to behave. And the Bachelor has paraphrased or kind of changed a phrase that many men use when they're talking about their spouses, or happy wife, happy life. Well, the Bachelor says, happy ghost, happy life. If you keep Jack happy by giving him lots of attention, then the household will be very happy. And one thing about this child, the child will never grow up and never leave the home. So the Bachelor is just resigned to the fact that he will have a child living in his home for the rest of his life. And the Bachelor did mention that his parents were very disappointed that he chose not to get married and have a family. And he is of the opinion that his parents sent this little boy ghost to live with the Bachelor, as the parents, you might say, a little bit of revenge, if you will, for not giving them grandchildren. So anyway, that's a fun little story, a lighthearted story. Now, not too far away, still in kind of the Calistoga area, is what I call the Enchanted Farm. And it's in the hillside area near Calistoga, and it has some spectral secrets. One in particular is the fact that their livestock is not living, or at least some of them. We might call them paranormal pets, and they are Boo the bunny, Mama cat and kitten, old mare, and this is a little odd for a farm in the wine country, Pete the peacock. And this property has been in the same family for about 5-6 generations. And when the first generation purchased the property, they started to restore the old farmhouses, basically a cabin in the old barn. And as they were doing this, the animals started to appear. First, it was the bunny and the mama cat and her baby cat, their kitten. And they appeared right around the wood-burning stove. And it was a little unsettling at first, but they weren't disruptive, and they were actually rather helpful to the couple that owned the property. And then when the couple started working on the barn, which was in very bad shape, I mean, they could have easily torn it down. It could have been justified, but they decided to restore it. And as they were doing that, and they were having trouble with one particular section of wall because the joists were sagging, and they were working and working on it. And then they started hearing a noise, and they looked and they saw Old Mare appear before their eyes. And Old Mare backed up towards them. So they cleared. I mean, they were a little stunned first to see a ghost horse. And then the horse backed up to the problem joist and gave it a really good strong kick and put the joist right back in place and right at that wall. So it was, it was a welcomed help from a ghostly horse. And then as they were working more on the barn, the peacock showed up. And when he was pleased with what they were doing, he would fan his beautiful, ghostly, iridescent tail feathers. But when he was not happy with what they were doing, he would flap and storm and just flutter all over the place, creating quite a ruckus. And the mare would just shake her head, just like in disapproval, and then she would disappear. And then Pete would just stop and he would disappear. So the couple would say, okay, we need to rethink what we're doing. And if Pete's happy, then we'll all be happy. So they lived together very well and they coexisted. And the couple, the mortal couple, decided that they were going to keep this a secret and they were going to be the guardians of these special beings. And they had other living beings. In fact, when they would bring in a live puppy or a kitten, the supernatural animals would have a little fun with them. and the fact that they would be playing with them like tag, like animals do. And then all of a sudden, when like the dog was about ready to pounce, or the cat was about ready to pounce, or the puppy and kitten, all of a sudden the supernatural animals would just vanish, and the puppy and kitten would just be like, what just happened? And the humans would say it would be quite amusing. They felt sorry for the living puppy or kitten, but it was created quite a laugh. It was a lot of laughter. Anyway, it went through many generations as far as its property, and the property has changed. They've made a lot of improvements as far as like a new house where the larger family could live, but they still have a very special uh, use for the cabin, and it's usually reserved for the older members of the family. And then the barn is specially reserved for the paranormal pets. That's kind of where they go when they want to get away from human beings. And then, because there's a modern barn. And these animals are also very good at sensing the intent of someone that's coming on the property. If it is someone that is maybe not the best of persons, they might have ill intent, that sort of thing. The animals purposely scare them off of the property, and to protect their protectors. So it's been a loving place, and I thought I'd just have this little fun little clip art, with that'd be like Mama cat and her kitten, because they are both black cats, which seems appropriate for ghost kitties. And this is a wonderful piece of clip art. But I haven't had the privilege of going to the property. I've just spoken with the current caretakers, and it seems to be a place that is very serene. So you never know what you'll find at a lovely country home. Now, just down the road is Behringer Winery. And this is my one attempt at Photoshop. I hope you like it because it's the one and only. Anyway, I just thought this is perfect. The Behringer Winery, which was established in the 1870s by Jacob and Frederick Behringer, hence the name Behringer Brothers. It's been an icon. It's been well known and respected for the quality of wine that they produce. It's also become known for its spirits. And I'm not talking about wine and brandy. I'm talking about those from the other realm. And they being people who work there, have a very, very large file of all these different activities that go on at Behringer Winery. I want to show you one of the first locations where there's a story. And the story goes, it's a tale. This is not fact, it's an interesting tale. This was told by Virginia Hanrahan, who lived here in Napa Valley all of her life. And it was told again by her niece, Kathleen Kernberger. And they always did this tongue in cheek. But it was said that the Behringers were running a little short on money, and they couldn't pay the Chinese laborers who were digging their wine caves or tunnels. So the Behringers supposedly, in order to deal with this issue, caved in the caves to entrap the Chinese laborers, so they wouldn't have to pay them. But of course, this is a dark fable. It's not true. But supposedly, on a dark and stormy night, you can hear the wails and the cries of the Chinese that were entombed in the very back portion of these caves, begging to be released from the caves and promising not to ask them for money and payment. They just want their freedom and their lives. And this would happen like the winds that we had last night would have caused this. Well, that occurrence ended once they gun-nighted the caves. What they discovered is that the winds would be forced through the cracks in the rock above the tunnels, through the fissures, if you will, of these openings. And in the process of passing through rocks and that sort of thing, it would create whistles and kind of almost what sounded like moans and groans. But when it was sealed off on the inside with a gunite, those sounds could no longer permeate those fissures into the tunnels, where the tunnels acted like an amplifier, if you will, for those sounds, and hence the sounds, the moans and groans. So that is one of the stories that's associated with Behringer's. I wanted to show you another picture of Behringer. The woman standing at the very back is Bertha Behringer. She was a daughter of Jacob Behringer, and she ran the winery for many, many years. Now, here are Jacob, who's on the left, and Frederick, who is on the right, Behringer. And the big cask in the middle was the well-known cask that they would use. It was hand carved and had the two big letters BB on the front of it. And it was used at the harvest festival. It was put on the floats, that sort of thing. And in later years, many celebrities stood in front of that cask to have their picture taken. So that's just an interesting side note. And anyway, most of you are probably familiar with the Rhine House. This is just an interesting shot. It kind of gives you kind of a creepy feeling of the entrance to the Rhine House. Well, this was the home of Frederick Behringer and his family when he was alive. And it was built to look like a house, a manor house along the Rhine, hence the name the Rhine House. And there are many tales of hauntings and spirited events at the Rhine House, and it's all Frederick. That's why I wanted to show you a picture of Frederick, because you can see him either fully or partially when he decides to make appearances in his former residence. And the first one is that sometimes you just hear him, like you hear what's called footfall. You can hear someone walking up the stairs and gradually going up the steps to the second floor when no one else is in the building. The staff is usually the ones that hear this. And it's after hours or before hours and before the visitors come in. And then there are other times when upstairs there used to be like a VIP tasting room. And there were like this special crystal wine glasses, and they were all set out on silver trays, you know, to make it seem very ornate and elaborate, very special tasting. Well, on a regular basis, they would hear, they being the staff once again, would hear this great big crash, and the glasses breaking, the trays hitting the floor. And what the staff would often do, one would go up the main entrance, the main steps to the second floor, and the other one would take the back steps, or like what would be the servant stairs. And just in case they wanted to catch whoever it was upstairs, so they wanted to take both possible ways of getting upstairs. And they would both reach upstairs, and but they would not have passed anyone. But they would get into the tasting room, and everything was just a mess. You know, broken glass, the trays everywhere. And then when, as they were cleaning up, they turn around and they would see Frederick standing there, just looking at them disapprovingly. They think that he disapproved because the crystal was not properly cleaned, or the trays were not properly polished. And so he made it very apparent that they had to step it up as far as the quality of service that they were giving the visitors during the wine tasting. I want to show you a shot of the interior. And this is the foyer to tell you a little bit more. You know, these The staff members that I talked about, while they were frightened a bit about it, they continued to work there at Behringer's. But the story goes that one day, one of the staff members was cleaning up, and he was actually like a housekeeper, and he was there alone, and he heard a noise. He turned around, he saw Frederick, and then he saw or witnessed Frederick walking through the walls. And with that particular staff member ran out the front door to his car and was never seen again. He didn't even come back to pick up his paycheck. It scared him so much. So those are some of the stories that I've been told about Behringer Winery. And I just thought there's some interesting ones. And this is a great shot of a very foggy vineyard. I thought was appropriate with Behringer's. And it's appropriate for the next story I'm about ready to tell you. Now, I just used this image because it was actually a publicity shot from a scene in the movie called The Unholy Wife. And that particular movie was shot pretty much in its entirety. This is the late 1950s at Behringer Winery. And it has a different name on the front of the barrel to go with the name of the winery owner in the movie. But this is in or at Behringer Winery. And I do believe it was 1957 or 1958 when this movie was filmed here. And the actor, unfortunately, I don't remember the actor's name. It's either his first or last name was Tyrone. But the actress, her name is Diana Dors. And she was an English actress, and she was considered England's answer to Marilyn Monroe. But I'm using these two because they are very attractive. And I thought they would be a nice tie-in from the last story and the next story, which I'm going to tell you, which is the devilishly good looking. So I will tell you more about this. I'm going to go back up to Calistoga to tell you about this story. And it's actually at a Calistoga area bar. And it is an entity versus an apparition or a ghost. But it's appropriate because it's supernatural, and that's what we're talking about this evening. This entity is a shapeshifter. It either comes in as a beautiful woman or a handsome man. And it changes from, according to its whim. It doesn't change once it's there at this bar. It is either a woman the whole time or a man the whole time. And how do they know it's the same entity? Well, there is a bartender that's worked there for decades. And there are two identifying traits to this entity that is shared by either the male or female embodiment that it has. It's the color of the eyes, and they are an unusual kind of yellowish, brownish gold, which are kind of eerie. And there's very little pupil to those eyes. And then there's also a mark on the palm of their left hand. And I'm saying they because be either female or male. And it is an unusual mark. It's kind of a random shape. And it is kind of like that, those purplish, reddish bruises that we sometimes get. It's along those lines. And, but both of these, whether male or female, have that mark in the center of their left palm, plus the unusual eye color. They also order a specific drink, which they look at longingly, but they never can pick it up for some unknown reason. They really want to have that drink, but they can't. So what happens is that they are the further description, they are very charming, he or she. In fact, they're almost beguiling. When they set their sights on a human being, they go up to them and they start chatting with them. This is especially so with the male. Um, he seems to be very good at being charming. And to the ladies, the women in the bar, the female women in the bar. And the old bartender says he has to constantly remind his staff that this is not a real person and to be on their guard, that they don't fall subject to the charms of this particular entity. But anyway, so they come up to a human being that they've set their sights on and start chatting them up and talking, and they like to touch them and that sort of thing, but not inappropriately. We just kind of gradually uh, get them to let down their guard, and they start talking with them, and they convince them to go elsewhere with them. So the mortal leaves the bar with the this entity, and but it's only briefly. As soon as they are heard leaving, they hear this terrible ruckus of crows, they being the people in the bar. And shortly thereafter, the mortal comes in looking very frightened and, almost beyond control because of their fright. And this individual, once they gain kind of their sense and their balance and calm down a bit, they talk about the experience that they had, a very brief experience, thank goodness. They say that either the woman or the man, this entity, whatever form they were taking, they mutate into this very hideous looking creature that is what you might say is almost like a demon in appearance. And they approach them, this demon character approaches them, and with a very wicked laugh, he just starts to lunge towards them while all this ruckus is going on with the crows, and then they disappear. But you continue to hear the laughter. The human wants to get out of there for their own safety, and they rush back into the bar. And this sounds like a fantastic, incredible, hard to believe story, but it's happened repeatedly over about the last about 30, 40 years. And it has been told by the staff. And even new staff who haven't been really clued into this have the same accounting of what's happened. So it's not like they've been clued in by long-term staff. So it's kind of it is a scary experience. And I included it because it's the supernatural, that sort of thing, versus a ghost. Now we're going to move back down valley a little bit more to a haunted house. And it's in the Rutherford area. And I call this one Angry Voices. I was told this story a couple of years ago by a very sound-minded woman who grew up in this house in the Rutherford area on the family ranch. And she said, and she came from a very large family. There were 12 children in that family that lived in that house, plus the parents. And so in the earlier days when there were so many of them in the house, they didn't notice anything. But as the older children grew up and moved out of the house, the younger ones started noticing some things going on in the house. And, they would notice things like upstairs in one particular bedroom, there would be first whispers and then voices that they did not recognize. And then those whispers would get louder and louder, and they would turn into an argument. And the argument lasted for a very long time, and you just hear like stomping, and like there was a really rip-roaring argument going on in that room. And then all of a sudden it would stop. And even if someone walked into that room while that argument was going on, it did not stop. They did not see anyone, but you felt this really angry energy. It was very cold in that room when that was going on. And the woman who told me this said, once everybody was older, all of the kids were older and had moved out of the house, and the dad had passed away. The mom continued to live there in the house, and but being older, she needed some assistance, just taking care of herself and just daily things like, fixing meals, that sort of thing. They had a heck of a time keeping staff, um, home health care people there because they wanted live-in people helping their mom. And because of the angry voices, a lot of the home health care individuals would want to leave. They didn't want to spend the night there because of the angry voices in the house. And this woman told me, as far as she knows, they're still there, even though the family sold the property, I think about 10 years ago or so, 10, 15 years ago. So they probably still are fighting away up in that particular bedroom. It must have been one heck of a fight that one particular night. Anyway, so we're going to continue down valley. We are going to go to Yachtville. As we pass Yachtville on 29, on the right-hand side, there is Yachtville Hill. And it's called that because on the on the eastern side of that hill is the location of where Yount's flour mill was once located, called the Star of the Pacific. Anyway, so that's why there's the name Yachtville Road or Yachtville Hill. That could be a good sobriety check. Can you say that quickly? But anyway, there is a story that was around for quite a few years, starting around the 1940s and through about the 1960s, early 1970s. And this was told to me once again by a very sound-minded individual who lives here. And it takes place actually around the cemetery with the hill as the backdrop. And people would hear about this story of this phantom that would appear at the top of the hill and work its way down to the cemetery. So people were curious and they would gather. In fact, it would be kind of a place to hang out. And, people would park their cars in the whole cemetery, the Yachtville Cemetery, would be, enveloped by these, cars parked willy-nilly, as the saying would go, and kind of blocking everyone in. Anyway, they would wait for hours. And a lot of people that would go there would, of course, be, like teenagers and young adults who were just curious and, something to do on a Friday night, a Saturday night when there was nothing else to do in town. But anyway, they would all be waiting and they'd start to get bored and they start to say, hey, where are you? You're a phantom, you're just a fake, whatever. And then like a passing car or vehicle, its lights would illuminate the cemetery and it'd be like silence and then nothing. So this would go on for a while. And then just as everybody was thinking, okay, let's go, nothing's going to happen tonight, there would be this bright greenish, fluorescent green light that would appear at the top of the hill. It was a very large orb, like a big boulder in size, and it was glowing. It was very eerie glow to it. And it would just kind of morph as far as its size. It would contract and it would expand and it would take slightly different forms. And then it would start to kind of move, and it was very sluggish in its movement. And, the crowd below would kind of jeer and taunt it, that sort of thing, and it would stop. And then it would just slowly kind of almost like switchback turns down the road or down the hill. And at one point it stopped and it started to vibrate just very violently. And all of a sudden it just kind of exploded into all these little teeny spheres. And it was almost like a show where they were doing a choreographed number of these spheres kind of dancing around. And people below started laughing and that sort of thing. And it stopped. And as if it was upset by these, the humans laughing at them. And once again, they would start to vibrate and this bright light started to shine. And then it recongealed into this huge huge sphere, this glowing sphere. And it was bigger than it was when it was at the top of the hill. And then it started racing down the hill, and it got bigger and bigger, and you could just feel the energy as it advanced, like this energy wave was coming towards the people, and it was going faster and faster and faster. And it was scaring the human beings because they thought, uh-oh, we're in line for this like uh, paranormal tsunami wave. And so everybody started jumping in their cars and tearing out of there. And there were all sorts of like fender benders, whatever, because people would be backing into the trees and into each other, and they would tear out of there. And the one person who told me said that as they looked back in the rearview mirror, they saw this great big like cloud hovering over the cemetery. And it was that greenish, it was sort of like fog. And then it would just, like a blanket, would just settle in over the cemetery. And it just hovered there. And because she stopped alongside the road and to watch this unfold. And then it settled closer and closer to the ground. And then it turned into like a big vortex and was drawn into the soil, into the ground. And then it vanished and it was silent. Well, some of her friends said that they were going to go back the next day to see if they could find any trace of where this opening was, this portal for this green light. And they went back and they couldn't find anything the next day. And so, you know, they weren't sure what they witnessed, but they knew it was real. There were many witnesses. This happened for generations. But why it stopped, I don't know. Maybe because of construction. Maybe because there's too many people. There are too many people around. Maybe the spirits, the energy, the entity, whatever, moved on into another realm. It's hard to say. But as far as I know, it doesn't. This event doesn't happen, at least not to the magnitude it once did. There's another related story to the Yachtville Cemetery. Many people have seen this gentleman, George C. Yount himself, strolling throughout town as if he is inspecting the town that became known as Yachtville. When he first settled the area, of course, there was no town. And then when there was this little outpost that adjoined his property, it was known as Sebastopol. And it wasn't named Yachtville until after he died. It was in 1865, it was renamed Yachtville. But anyway, those that have seen him say that he's a full apparition. He does interact to a minimal degree with human beings. He doesn't really talk with them, that sort of thing, but he'll nod as if, you know, to acknowledge them. And his walk takes him along either the main streets, either, let's see, that's Washington, or I've forgotten the other street name, but runs north-south in Yachtville. And he always stops at the cemetery. And he goes to the family plot as if he's paying respects to his family members that are buried there and who are truly at peace, where they've moved on. And for whatever reason, he does come back for a visit. And then after that, he walks eastward, and then he turns northward to go towards his where his adobe was once located, the site of the mill. And I don't know if any of you have been on that road. It curves around the hill. It's very scenic. It's absolutely beautiful. But there's like a narrow one-lane bridge, and he continues to walk. And people that are in that area have seen him where he grows much stronger in his visibility as he approaches that property. And then as he walks towards what is the outline of his mill, he disappears. And that's the end of his stroll. And it's not very often that he does this. No one's been able to figure out if it's a specific date, like an anniversary date, that sort of thing, but he is seen on a regular basis strolling the town, the streets of the town that's named after him, Yachtville. So that is the two stories about Yachtville. This is actually a street in Napa, but I thought it was appropriate. Strolling down the street, as you can see, they were very unimproved in the earlier days. This is actually Seminary Street in Napa. Our next stop is in Napa, and it is the Uptown Theater. And this was, well, obviously 2016, so this photo was taken a while ago, but it's a beautiful shot. And there's someone on screen. Thank you for letting me use your screensaver for this. I appreciate it. It's appropriate. It's a night shot. There are some really interesting stories that go with the Uptown Theater. There are two not entities, but apparitions that have been felt or seen at the Uptown Theater, and then some unexplained occurrences that the staff have experienced there as well. The first one is of a woman. She's dressed all in white, but like 1940s type of attire, not like she's in like an angel's robe or something like that. It's more of a period type of clothing. Her hair is neatly up in a bun, and then she is seen kind of towards the back of the stage area, and she looks like she's lost. She doesn't understand why she's there. And from all indications, from what research has been able to reveal, she actually, during a program, a rehearsal for a program, like a school program, she fell off the little stage, and which is not that tall, but unfortunately she either struck her head or something, and she sustained a fatal injury. And she died there at the Uptown Theater from that injury. And so, because it was so unexpected, that sort of thing, supposedly her spirit is still at the theater. That's the explanation of those that have gone into the theater and have called her forward to try to communicate with her, to get her to go to the other side. But they have been unsuccessful. The next ghost is far less benign. He is rather a miserable spirit. He was miserable in life, and he continues to be in the afterlife. He was known as Charlie, and he was a living patron of the theater, and it was probably in the 40s, 50s, and 60s that he was a patron, and he was there every night, and he had his spot. And if anyone ever dared sit in his seat, he would make such a ruckus. Or if children came in, he says, "Who would let them in here? They make so much noise. They're such a distraction," so on and so forth. Or if there was someone tall in front of him, he would make a big scene. And even though he was somewhat annoying, or not somewhat, he was annoying and he was difficult to deal with, he was still given full access to the entire theater. So he was allowed to go up into the projection room and elsewhere. He was given free refreshments, that sort of thing. He was given preferential treatment, and people just kind of tolerated him. And as he got older, he was having issues with controlling his body, and he did have problems with urinating at a seat, and which was rather annoying to people around him because it was very unpleasant. And also, he would fall asleep in his seat, and but no one was allowed to wake him after the show was over except for the manager. because he would just wake up with a start and get very angry, and only the manager seemed to be able to handle him. Well, one night he didn't fall asleep. He actually passed away from a heart attack that he experienced uh, while he was at the theater. And many people rejoiced in the fact that he was no longer going to be a problem at the theater. Well, he is now an eternal patron at the theater. He comes back on a regular basis. I don't know if he has since they redid the Uptown Theater. I haven't heard, but some say that he has. But regardless of that fact, what he would do is he would, with very cold hands, press up against the mortals that were ahead of him and push his way through and say, "Get out of my way, get out of my way." And there was a very cold presence about him. He would be yelling, like, "Get out, sit down, or stop making so much noise." And he would also go into the restrooms and bother the patrons the living patrons, while they were taking care of their personal business, and do some inappropriate things, and making it all very uncomfortable for the mortals that were there. Then he would also do things like go up into the projection room and mess with the projection equipment. And those that had worked there while Charlie was alive knew immediately who it was, especially once they heard his voice. And it was Charlie, and he was back for good. They had to deal with him for eternity. But as I said, once they've restored it, I haven't heard of any accounts of Charlie being around, but they might just be keeping it quiet. I don't know. Other unexplained activity is either before or after the theater would be open when it was a movie house. There would be things such as the pinball machines in the days when they had the pinball machines there, all of a sudden starting up, and as if someone's standing there playing it when no one was there. They'd hear whispers in the balcony when no one was there. They'd hear footfall up the steps in the theater going up to the upstairs, the loge seating. And there's no other reason than it's some entity, it is some apparition, it's a spirit of some kind. They're all convinced that that's what it is. It's a haunting of the Uptown Theater. So there's many accounts for the Uptown Theater. These are the ones that I've been told. So I'm going to go on to our next stop, which is the Napa State Hospital. It's the first building. It was known as the Castle, and you can understand why. It was built in the 1870s, and it was state of the art at the time. It was finally the core section that you see in the center of the building. It took dynamite to bring this down, and it was in the early 1950s when they finally brought the whole thing down, because supposedly it was structurally unsound. But obviously it had some strength to it, but that's another point altogether. I'm going to keep moving forward with this because I'm already past time here, but I'm going to keep going with the stories. The story goes that there are a number of activities here. One is a character by the name of Freddie. He was a patient or a client at the hospital. He was a young boy who had some psychological issues, and he was quite the prankster. And long after his passing, he would do things like any number of offices. He would, take people's keys. He would, move papers around, and he would hide papers, and any number of things, little objects, just making life very, uncomfortable. Inconvenient would be a better word for the living staff at the hospital. And then at the plumbing shop, because they had shops. I'm going to show you more images here. This is another scene. This is the grounds that were on the east side of the building I just, or the shot I just showed you. Anyway, throughout the property, there were different shops, structures that serviced everything that they needed, such as the metal shop, the plumbing shop, the, yeah, I could go on and on about the different ones.
Okay.
But in one particular shop, which was the plumbing shop, there was one client who started working there, and he worked there all of his life until he passed. But he was very compulsive, and he had to have everything in a specific order, very nice, neat, and tidy. And eventually, a human came in and started. He was the manager of that shop, and he had a different idea as to how things should be set up. So he set up the shop differently, and he was very happy with the way it was set up. And he went home at the end of the work day, and he came back the next day, and it was exactly the way it was when he first went into the shop. Everything he did was undone and returned to the way it was before. So he was very frustrated and rather angry, so he set things up again. And this kept happening over and over and over again. And finally, he began to wonder what is going on. And then he realized when he stood outside the shop one evening that it was the ghost of this particular gentleman that worked there for years, returning the shop to the way he liked it back in the day when he was living. So the mortal worker decided just to leave things as the worker had it, simply because it was a waste of time and energy. So anyway, that's one more story. And then I'll show you this shot. This is where the doctors who worked at the state hospital, this is where they lived. There were a number of houses, would be the physicians' residences. Well, in one particular residence, I'm not sure which one, I haven't been in them, there is a ghost. And people go in and they see this lovely woman who is probably, you might say middle-aged, sitting there in a chair, just calmly doing like needlepoint, some type of needlecraft work. And she sees them come in. She looks up. She nods at them. She sets down her needlecraft. She gets up very graciously from her chair, and she walks towards them as if to greet them. She smiles, and then she disappears. And this scene is repeated frequently as mortals come in, especially those that have not been in the building before. And sometimes she does this with her favorite mortals when they come in for work, that sort of thing. And there's no words said. It is just her gracious gestures and attitudes, her body language, that sort of thing. And her attire, it is of a period from probably like around 1890 or thereabouts, the 1890s, right before the turn of the 20th century. So that's a ghost that is a very kindly ghost, a very gracious ghost. And she's never acted up or acted hostile towards any mortal. So she's just welcoming them into her home. So, and I don't know any details about her identity or when she lived there or what became of her in her life. This is a picture of the entire grounds, as you can see, and you can see the other smaller outbuildings. There's a dairy and which is off to the right, and you can see the pasture where there was grazing, and then of course the orchard, that sort of thing. And there was also a cemetery. This is clip art. I don't have a picture of the cemetery. There are a lot of unmarked graves for those that were patients there that passed and were buried. They were either the families did not want to claim them, their remains, or they were unable to financially, or they had no family to to claim their remains. So they were buried at the cemetery at the Napa State Hospital. Well, there are people who say that there's quite a bit of activity, paranormal activity at this particular cemetery. And there have been, some of them are fights. And I don't know if there was a fight that resulted in a death, but they are somehow very close to one another. And they're men, and there's two of them. And they rise out of their graves. And it's like they're still trying to settle this argument, this contest, whatever it was that caused them to start fighting. And they keep at it, and throwing punches, that sort of thing. And eventually they fade away and fade back into their graves. Another one is you can hear it, you really can't see it. There's like energy emanating from some of these graves, and you hear crying, such as, let me out of here, why am I here, what happens, I want to go home, any number of very short statements. And there's another one that's very sad. It's of a young woman holding her infant child, and very happy, laughing, that sort of thing. And then there's a pair of hands that come out of nowhere that rip the child from the mother's embrace. And she falls to her knees, crying and begging for her child back. And she becomes hysterical, and she just melts right into her grave, crying and weeping. So it is, it's quite a heart-wrenching scene. And that's just some of the things that are, some of the stories at the cemetery of the state hospital and the state hospital in general. Now I have some stories about the Miglivaca family. The Miglivaca Wine Company is located, or was located, about where the library, the Napa County Library, main library, is now located. And it was a prize-winning winery. It was established in the 1860s, and it was owned by Giacomo Miglivaca, who was from Italy. And he has been said to stroll through, when he was living, he would stroll through his winery inspecting his wines, that sort of thing. And the winery itself was located about where in close proximity to where the children's section of the library is located. I was told this by a librarian that works at the library now. And she was told this by a librarian that works in, or worked in, the children's section. She said that she saw a full apparition of a very stately gentleman that was attired in 1890s, well, late 1800s clothing. And she said you knew it was a real person because you could see some of the things behind him. He wasn't fully transparent, but he was not dense or solid. So you could tell that he was a spirit. And he would walk around looking as if to survey the scene. He wouldn't interact. He would not cause any problems. And then he would disappear. And then when she saw a photograph of Giacomo Miglivaca, she said, that's him. The ghost that she saw, and she saw him just once, was Giacomo Miglivaca. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of him. If I did, I would show it to you. Anyway, so he strolls through the library from time to time. I've only heard of the one instance, but who knows? He might be there more frequently. Maybe Tess, you can be on the lookout for him. How's that? Anyway, the Miglivaca mansion, which now sits on the corner of 4th and Even Street, was originally located right where the library is located now. Well, actually, there. It's right where the parking lot is located. And it was moved to this location in the 1970s, and basically it was reconstructed. They did a beautiful job of not only rehabilitation, but a restoration of the building. And they being the gentleman who purchased it for $1 and moved it from that location to this location. And it cost him tens of thousands of dollars to do all of that. So we're all grateful that it remains. But the story goes that the mansion is visited, occupied by Giacomo and his wife, Maddalena. And work there, in offices, that sort of thing. Hear voices.
Call from
And they can hear someone needs to answer their phone. Anyway, they hear music coming from the third floor, which was the dance hall, the dance room. And they can also hear heavy footfall going up the stairs. That's probably a male because of the sound of it. They've also heard a woman crying. You can also see a silhouette of a woman in the, if you look at this image, the second story of the tower, which is the rounded part, you can see a silhouette of a woman either in that section or the third floor. And unfortunately, the Migliavacas lost one of their children, a son. I forgot, his name was Cornelius, I do believe, to diphtheria, which is a horrible disease. And he was about 8 years old, I do believe, when he was claimed by that disease. And Maddalena, of course, was devastated by the loss of her son, as was Giacomo. But she was heard crying on a regular basis after his death. And they do believe that the woman you hear is Maddalena crying after the death of her young son lost to diphtheria. And that was an epidemic in the, I think it was the 1880s, if I remember correctly. So that's a little bit about the Migliavacas. There is a little bit more about the Migliavacas. The family has a family crypt. Actually, it's a mausoleum that is up the hill. This is the old gate that used to be the entrance into Tulaque Cemetery. And at the family mausoleum, there's a little stone wall, retaining wall, and a woman was sitting there and just kind of taking in the scene because it's up on a hill and you can see the cemetery kind of stretched out below you. And it's, it's very park-like and it was beautiful. And all of a sudden, she just closed her eyes for a minute and she saw this like talking head. And this woman who was obviously dressed in period attire and with a period head hairstyle started, just talking and talking and talking to this woman, the living woman, about some story that was very important to her. The living woman would not reveal what that story was. She said it was something that was very personal for this young woman. And she found out this young woman is buried within the family mausoleum, and is Angelina, who is the wine taster of the Migliavaca wine. If she had such a sensitive palate that if she didn't like the wine, they would not release that wine. But if she liked it, it was usually an award-winning wine. But this woman said it was just kind of after Angelina finished talking and kind of left her presence, the living woman just kind of sat there going, that was odd. What was that? And once she saw a picture of Angelina, she knew what had happened. And that was a paranormal experience. I just thought I'd add this. This is a marker for the Juarez family and one of the many beautiful markers at Tulaque Cemetery. And I just thought I'd throw this in. This is just an interesting photograph My next story and my last story is about what I call Spanish Town siblings. And I thought this would just kind of fun lead in. This is not a picture of this house. It's just a house of the era. It was a small workman's cottage, and that was in what was called Spanish Town. That's the neighborhood around the St. John's Catholic Church, which is on Main Street in downtown Napa. And the story goes that on occasion, there are two young brothers between the ages of 4 and 8. One being younger, one being older, and they are playing like cowboys kind of thing. They have their Western hats on, and they have their holsters with their cap guns, and they're playing it out in front of the house and having a good time. And then all of a sudden they stop, as if they hear something, and they kind of giggle and laugh. They put their hands over their mouths, and they kind of secret themselves away. And then all of a sudden, this other spirit approaches, and it's of a young girl, a little bit older, like about 10 to 12, somewhere in that age range. And they jump out in front of her, shooting off their cap guns, and she goes squealing and screaming into the house. You hear the wood screen door slam behind her, and you hear her say, "Mom, they did it again." And then the mom says, "Honey, they're just being boys." And the boys outside are just laughing hard, so hard. They're holding their sides, and they're laugh. They keep doing that until they disappear. And that's the end of that scene. So that's one of the fun little stories. It's brief, but it's been seen repeatedly by the people that live in that house and also live in that neighborhood. So there you go, as far as some of the stories of Napa's paranormal activities, Napa County's paranormal activities. And I do have a couple of thank yous I want to get to. Here's a spooky night, moonlit night. I want to thank Napa County Landmarks. As you can read here, they are a local historic preservation nonprofit organization. They granted me the use of this office and technical support to make this Zoom presentation possible. And just so you know, Napa County Landmarks is as I said, a historic preservation organization, and you can just call them NCL, and you can read their mission is to preserve and protect Napa's architectural and cultural heritage, the legacy of Napa County's past. And there's contact information at the bottom of the screen, their phone number, which is 255-1836, or visit napacountylandmarks.org for more information. So thank you, Ernie, who is the president of Napa County Landmarks, and thank you, Annie, for all your support. It's been incredible, so thanks. And one more thank you. I'm going to turn down the lights in a minute, and I can hear you as you ask your questions. I'm going to turn the lights down so you can see the two pumpkins behind me. They have been created by Eric Munsterman. He is of Napa, and he is a master pumpkin carver. And they're absolutely incredible. And he loaned them these two pumpkins for tonight's presentation. And he is going to have a Zoom class this Friday, which is the 30th, from 4 to 6 p.m. And yeah, if you want more information and to register, the class is $45. Go to this link that is on here, which is https://nimbusarts.aspconnected.com/number course ID equals 209122, or call the number that's on your screen. I think I've said enough about that. Thank you. But I will turn the lights down in just a minute. But I have one more thank you. Thank you for signing on and being a part of this. And I hope all the spirits that are with you this Halloween are good spirits, whether they be around you or in your glass, whichever you choose. Enjoy that. And one more thing, I thought this is appropriate. Count Dracula asking you, do you dare have any questions or comments about tonight's presentation? So what I'm going to do, I can hear you. If you turn your audio on, I'm going to get up for a moment and I'm going to turn down the lights so you can see the pumpkins and enjoy them. And does anyone have any questions or comments, any contributions, any additions to the stories I've told? Anyone?
Those are all very fascinating. I had never heard most of those stories. So thank you, Rebecca, for sharing.
What do you think of the pumpkins?
They look great.
So does anyone have any questions or comments?
No.
I don't think so. I think we all just really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge. You know so much about the paranormal history of Napa.
Oh, this is just the beginning. I have quite a large file on these stories, and I'm grateful for those people who have been willing to share them with me. And so thank you so much for being a part of tonight's presentation. And I see some people have already kind of checked out. So thank you, or signed off, I should say. And I did see a cousin of mine show up. If you're there, come back on screen. If not, I will hear from him probably via email. But anyway, Tess, thank you for everything. I really appreciate it. And we had a little technical glitch at the beginning, but we seemed to work it out, and we're doing just fine.
Yes, thank you so much. This will be also, the recording will be on the Napa County Library website. I will share that link with you, Rebecca, once I have it.
Thank you.
And but if you go onto the website and you go to virtual events, there's a recordings page if anyone wants to check that out. Probably in a few days it'll be up.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And everyone have a safe Halloween.
Halloween, everyone.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween. Yes.